spite of all our communication technology, no invention is as effective as the sound of the human voice. When we hear the human voice, we instinctively want to listen in the hopes of understanding it, even when the speaker is searching for the right words to say. That's because the human voice resonates differently from everything else in the world. This is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. Listen in on candid conversations with creative entrepreneurs and insanely interesting people.
I was wearing the wrong foundation shade for years, and no one told me. Thanks, guys. Then I discovered Il Makiage, the bold new beauty brand using AI to shade match. Their best-selling Woke Up Like This foundation has 50,000 five-star reviews and is a total game changer for my glow-up. Plus, it's cruelty-free. You can even try before you buy at home for 14 days, risk-free. Take the quiz and get your shade of flawless at ilmakiage.com/quiz. That's ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
In this episode of the podcast, I speak with Bruce Poon. Bruce is not your typical CEO of a travel company. Starting with nothing but his college credit cards, over the last 20 years, Bruce has built G Adventures into a $250 million business. So listen in as he talks to me about the loop tail and his philosophies on life and business. Bruce, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, Bruce, I came across you by way of actually one of my listeners, Gary Arndt, actually. He sent me your book. He said, hey, Srini, I think this would be right up your alley. And I remember reading the description, and I thought, yeah, you pretty much nailed it. You really understand what I look for in a guest. I mean, you really do fit the whole label of being unmistakable. So I guess really where I want to start is really your story of how you built G Adventures and how something like Looptail came to be.
Well, that's a long question. G Adventures in itself has a 23-year history, and it's the story of how G Adventures became a company and how we grew to where we are today is more of an entrepreneurial story. I mean, seeing, I was 22 at the time and saw, a need or had my own Eureka moment to want to start a business. And at that time, it could have been anything. But over the course of 23 years, and the incredible story in which we've, gone from, taking my college credit card and starting a business to being, over $250 million in revenue, being the largest kind of small group adventure company in the world. I mean, that's the story itself is what motivated Looptail writing the book, because it's been such an incredible journey, and I wanted to kind of have a positive impact on others through my story. Mm-hmm. Starting the business, why I started the business was, like any other entrepreneur who, gets out of school and sees that, there's an industry that, has issues or has a problem, and you think you can do it better. And that's how I came, with G Adventures, because I entered the travel industry. When I started G Adventures, the world didn't need another travel company. So I had to create differentiation and create something unique enough that would be able to change the way people looked at their holiday time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about this Eureka moment, and I mean, it's funny, right? I was just having this conversation with somebody this morning. I think that there's something to be said for those moments. I think sometimes they come in very unusual ways. I mean, for me, it was in the form of an email from a friend who said that I should start this show because I had interviewed him for my other blog. But I think recognizing those moments is really, really important. And I'm curious, one, how you knew that was kind of one of those moments, and then, I mean, how do we take that in our own lives? How do we take advantage of our Eureka moments and make sure we don't miss out on them?
I think you have to be, fairly self-aware to know when opportunities are knocking. When destiny, turns on the radio, some people listen, some people don't. I mean, I'm a real believer that, everyone has their opportunities before them, and everyone has, their destiny and their place in the universe. And some people actively search and look and find their place in the universe, and a lot of people just don't care or aren't bothered and sleepwalk through life. And but I believe that everyone has a destiny, and there's people who pick up on those clues, and there's just people who don't, people who get it and people who don't.
What do you think? What do you think separates those two groups? I mean, do you think there's something inherently built into people that differentiates those two groups of people?
I think there's an argument, between, whether, it's nature or nurture, right? I mean, my mother always used to tell me, don't waste your people on people that don't get it. She used to say, there's two people in this world, my mother used to say, and it's people who get it and people who don't. And the people who don't they're sold on their own destiny and their own, where they, want to be in the world. And we, as entrepreneurs, we find people that, want to believe in a story, want to believe in what we're doing, and want to believe that, a company can change the world, or, an idea can change the world. And that's part of their destiny as it is part of my destiny.
You mentioned your mother. One of the things I love looking back at it is looking at early influences in somebody's life. I mean, was this something that you knew when you were a kid, that you had some sort of destiny? What was your childhood like? I mean, growing up, what kinds of influences kind of led you to this point of saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to take out my college credit cards and I have it in me to do this?
It's very easy for me to say that, oh yes, I always knew when I was very young. I certainly, I had 3 companies. I started 3 companies before I turned 16. So I always knew that business was in my blood, and it was always something that I wanted to do. And it was always part of my, what I say is my destiny. And when I look back, there was a lot of things that happened in my life that made me, that it was very clear to me that I knew very early, what I was meant to do. And then there's I had 3 companies before I turned 16, and my first job was at McDonald's, and I got fired after 2 weeks. and then got fired at McDonald's. So I got fired from Denny's McDonald's, and that's at the age of 16. That was tragic, but it was all part of my story, right? It was all part of, everything that made me what I am, and I knew that the only time I'd been successful was when I started businesses prior to turning 16, and so that's what I focused on, what I knew and what I was successful at, and that's what started, had me looking for ideas of a company to start when I was 22 years old.
Well, I can relate to the McDonald's thing, because my first job in high school was working at McDonald's, coincidentally.
And was it a great working experience?
Okay, so I happen to work for the one and only. I'm pretty sure, when you watch the movies and you see Jamaican people, they're pretty laid back. You see, like, you're thinking Bob Marley, Rastafarians, and I think I worked with the only angry Jamaican person on the entire planet, because she was vicious. I mean, she was pissed off all the time. Like, I was terrified of her. She was my manager at McDonald's.
Wow. I mean, I didn't even make it past the training program at McDonald's. I got fired during the training program, so you did better than me because you made it on the floor.
Yeah, I lasted 8 months. That was probably one of the most humbling experiences of my life, to go and work in an environment like that. I think, despite the fact that, I knew that was not my career, one of the things that gave me a deep appreciation for is the fact that, we complain about our lives in so many ways, but, like, when I looked at that and I saw, wow, some of these people here are basically going to make their entire living. This is how they survive. And I have the gift of being able to go get an education. And I realized how much we take so many things for granted.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a big thread that I want to get across in my book, in Looptail, about how we take a lot of things for granted every day. And those are the cues, and those are the notes that we have to remember when when people look for their place in the universe, and believing in your destiny, and believing that there's a higher purpose for what you do, or whatever it is you do, in whatever field, or whether it's whether you're working for someone or whether you're an entrepreneur. Everyone has their place in the universe, and our destinies before us. And I just believe that, and more so in business, like when you're actually running a business, and we're evidence of that success.
So before we get into Looptail and G Adventures, I want to actually start with your high school businesses, because you actually jogged my memory, and I remember reading about them, and I remember that was one of the funniest parts of the book. So I'm not going to let you off the hook without telling us about some of those businesses and your classmates. That story it brought a smile to my face because it was so funny.
Well, my first business was back in the days when home newspapers were being delivered, and you had to be 12 years old to have a newspaper, and a newspaper route, and I thought that was just the golden ticket to making money, would be getting a newspaper route, but I was 11. So I had to wait, and so when I turned 12, I applied for paper routes in various areas of the city, so I could have multiple routes, and then I subcontracted them to other 11 to 11-year-olds who couldn't get newspaper routes yet, and I used to split the profits with them. And so it was, that was the first thing. And then the next one was, a rabbit business. When I, came to my Eureka moment was, people buy rabbits when they're tiny, furry, cute little bunnies, but then they grow up to be, quite, livestock. They're no longer cute anymore. So I saw and read about a breed of rabbit out of the Netherlands called the Dutch dwarfs. They were dwarf rabbits that never grew. And so I imported them into Alberta and started breeding them and selling them at pet stores. And that was and then my next business was a bookmark business, which I did with a junior achievement program, which was offered in my school. So, I was always quite business focused. And I was quite odd. My parents were very concerned that I was doing these things when, my brothers, were playing hockey or, doing swimming and doing other sports. And I was, I was interested in doing after-school programs, starting a business. But to me, it was the most natural thing in the world.
Well, I remember you saying something about the rabbit business. Like you had classmates who were really pissed off at you because the rabbits died, or something along those lines. I remember that very distinctly, and that made me laugh so hard when I was reading the book.
No, yeah, it was kind of making a reference of Facebook because I haven't been on Facebook.
That's right.
Recently, and the guys in our marketing department were doing a promotion where they registered me on Facebook for a day to do some kind of contest, and within minutes, I got flooded with all these people that wanted to. I sat behind you in grade 4, and I don't know if I guess I knew you when you were 12 years old, living on this street, whatever. People were kind of making contact. And then I got an email from someone that said, you sold me a rabbit many years ago that turned out to be the worst pet ever. We should be friends on Facebook. Anyway, so, Facebook, that was my first introduction to Facebook, and then immediately canceled the account after that, actually. And I've been on Facebook for years. And just for the book, we have a Facebook account up now.
All right, perfect. Well, let's get into Looptail and building G Adventures. I mean, you started a company with a bunch of credit cards. I mean, from reading Looptail, I don't get the sense that this was sort of like the easiest journey by any stretch of the imagination. I saw a lot of ups and downs and moments in which this whole thing could have fallen apart, it seems like. I mean, multiple times. And so I'd love for you to walk us through sort of those moments and how you overcame them. And, I mean, how your philosophy as a leader and, the way you approach business is very, very refreshing. It's so different than anything I've come across. I mean, you've always, from what I've seen, been willing to challenge the status quo and do things despite the fact that they might not make you very popular.
Oh yeah, I mean that's part of being part of being an entrepreneur, but part of being innovation. It has a lot to do with the self-confidence to put things in front of people that they didn't even know they wanted. And at times that's you can be very popular, and at times you can be very unpopular. And that doesn't change your decision with progressing though.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, for me when I starting the company, there was never a point where I thought that it was going to be easy. I mean, entrepreneurs have their ups and downs. In my case, because we were so self-funded and bootstrapped our way for so long. Like people have to understand, like G Adventures is 23 years old. I've been doing this for quite a long time, so it's not a quick success story. But I was very passionate and motivated. It's what got me through those difficult times.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let me ask you, in those difficult times, I mean, are there specific moments that you recall that you really saw as sort of defining moments that basically kind of shaped this entire philosophy of the Looptail?
Yeah, I mean, the defining moment for me was that where the book opens, when I'm in Tibet in March 14th. 1997. It is the exact date. That is really the defining moment for me when I knew that went to Bhutan during that trip as well, where I saw, the idea of gross national happiness, which has been developed by the king at that point. And then I went through the spiritual journey through Tibet, which, showed how Tibet has lived for so many centuries as a country that makes its decisions based on oracles and, karma, and even though I was, my mind wasn't wired that way, and it still isn't to a certain extent, the idea, really resonated with me. And, it was one of those things that it changed the way I thought about my life. And then it was natural that it would change the extension, of my business, how I looked at my business. Because at that point, when you're in the trenches of starting a business, especially when you're bootstrapping from credit cards, your life is your business. So when your life changes, your business changes as well.
Mm-hmm. So, it's interesting. I mean, you brought up the spiritual journey, and I can honestly tell you, one of the things I could easily find as a common thread between our guests here on this show is a spiritual journey of some sort. And it happens in many forms. I mean, for one of our former guests, it happened by going to prison for 2 years. I mean, that was one of the most enlightening experiences of her life. For me personally, learning how to surf has been the ultimate spiritual journey. I mean, chasing waves has become such a defining part of my life. I guess, where I'm going with this is, do you think that in order to really find what we're meant to do in this world, a spiritual journey is actually essential?
I think everyone has their own path. I'll be honest with you. I mean, people don't necessarily have to, face hardships to be successful. I think we all have our own defining paths. I think some roads are lumpier than others. Mm-hmm. You can't compare the two either. I get that people want to often, especially people who read my book, they want to compare, often their experience. It's easy to relate to almost anybody's experience, but comparing might not be but the right thing to do when we all just have different paths, mm-hmm. and we can all relate to the journey the journey we all take in life to get to find our own higher purpose, but at the same time. The appreciation of the diversity of other people's paths is what makes the world great. The diversity of different people and different ways people get to where they need to go. Your journey, I'm sure, is just as enlightening, but just in a very different way.
Yeah, I would say I think it's really. I'm glad you brought up this idea of comparison, because to me it's almost an epidemic at this point, given sort of how publicly our lives are on display. I think we really, this is something that I personally have struggled with, because I spend all my days talking to people like you, and I always my business partner said, he's like, this completely warps your entire perspective on the world. He said, you're talking to the upper echelon of people who achieve things. He said, and if that's your basis for comparison, you're always going to feel out of your league.
Yeah, I mean that's a very dangerous road. I mean, I can't tell you how many, especially as this book has come out, I get letters from people which I'd never received before that, unfortunately I can't reply to them all. But I mean, it's the idea of inspiring someone by writing my book. There's a whole league of people that it might not have that positive an effect if they spend their time comparing, mm-hmm, because as I said, everyone's road is different, and the great thing about that is the celebration of diversity. The way that we get there. I mean, you don't have to have hardships to find success. That's some people's paths, and some people have really great family lives and really great, communities to help support them, and they become equally successful as people who, come from more difficult circumstances and have to rise above adversity to become successable. Mm-hmm. All those things make up, but in the end, it's about finding your own individual path. And you're an individual. Everyone's individual. Everyone's their own person, and that's why it makes it. So there's no reason why anyone's path should be compared.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Nothing more to add to that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really, it's an interesting point because, I mean, even when I talk to people here and our listeners write in, I always have to say, you need to take everything our guests say with a grain of salt, and also realize that I always say that the point of what you're learning here is to adapt it to your own particular situation, model rather than mimic it, because you're right. I mean, if we could, I don't, we jokingly said there is not a single guest who has told me, I read the 4-Hour Work Week and I followed this 4-step formula and that's how I ended up here. Every single person that I have talked to tells me a different story.
Yeah, I mean, you just hope that you get something out of it, that you can relate back to your own existence. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, when I took some time in the last week to read some of the reviews, which, I was avoiding reviews. I was determined to avoid reviews for my book, but they were, which surprisingly, my book has gotten such amazing reviews, but I didn't expect that, of course. Not being a writer, putting out a book was quite a daunting task, but, the reviews have been so positive that I went to kind of read them, and and the people that really didn't get the book to a certain extent, didn't necessarily, it's the people that compared it directly to their lives and what it could benefit their lives, how it could benefit their lives directly. And, but the people who kind of, read books or listen to your podcasts to try to get an influence or to try to hear about how other people find their way are the people that really find success. I mean, those are people that define themselves by becoming better people or better, stronger, or faster at whatever it is they do, but by being coachable, by be able to listen or read and be influenced by how other people are finding their way in the world. It's not the people looking for the people that are looking for that direct beeline, A to B direct line to success are the ones that set themselves up to failure. And they listen to things and they read things wanting a direct manual on how to get there. And there just isn't one.
Yeah, I mean, I always say straight and narrow paths very rarely lead to interesting destinations.
Exactly. Very true.
So let's do this. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to start getting into sort of the idea of loop tail and what this means. I mean, the way I understood the book and the way I interpreted the book is that the loop tail really is a framework for leadership and building organizations in the 21st century. And I'd love for you to expand and talk to us about sort of the elements of that framework and sort of, what are the implications for us as we go about approaching our lives, our businesses, and everything else?
Well, I think the original tagline for Loop Tail is why community, culture, and karma matter in business. And what that really means is how people look at their lives and how they look at their businesses, today. And when we have this social revolution upon us, that's bringing a level of transparency between those two worlds. Yet we come from the industrial age many years ago, where we were taught to separate work and personal life. People separate their work, like your work is over here, and it's you work to live, and then on this side you live your life separate from your work, which is a horrible way to live. And then today, with the social tools that are at everyone's disposal and the way people are becoming so connected, it's become very weird that people keep these two things separated because they're not finding passion in what they do. They're not finding purpose in what they do, regardless of what it is you do. I mean, as I said, you don't have to be an entrepreneur or start a huge company. You can work for an exciting company, but just be passionate in what its purpose is, and whether that's Federal Express doing courier delivery, or whether that's Apple putting new devices in people's hands and making people's lives easier through technology. These are all things that you find your purpose in contributing towards. And so Loop Tail is about how you shouldn't look at your business any different on how you would look at your life. And when people look at their lives, they people are living more sustainably. People are we're recycling at home. We're using low-watt light bulbs at home. Yet when they go on vacation, they suspend those beliefs and they go on a cruise ship or a compound resort holiday where no money stays in the local country and doesn't have local benefit. There's that disconnect that kind of caters to that idea that work and life are imbalanced. So when people talk about work-life balance, they talk about not working as much so you can, as I said, you can work to live. And it's as and you know, when you do the math and think about how much time you actually spend at work on a daily basis, not just working itself, but also waking up in the morning, getting ready for work, commuting to work, getting home from work, all of those things that you do, it's a majority of your life. So you should pursue some form of passion and purpose with whatever you do. And so, for me, Looptail goes further than that because it's an entrepreneurial story and how we incorporated that in our business. And when you look at your life, when you act a certain way in your life in terms of treating people how you'd want to be treated, and then doing that in your business, because business shouldn't be any different.
Mm-hmm.
Paying it forward. But the idea of karma, karma is a very spiritual word, but in business it means that whenever something bad happens to people, you often hear that expression, they'll get theirs one day, or karma will come back to them, or whatever, those kind of expressions. But business shouldn't be any different. We should look at how our businesses impact people, planet, and profit, as well as creating passion, purpose, and happiness with anyone who touches your brand. It creates that differentiation with a company that didn't exist before, because people didn't have the social tools to engage with customers and with companies like they do today. Mm-hmm. It's just a very different world. And companies that engage in and create that transparency and that relationship with their customers, engaging in that higher purpose of their business, are the ones that will survive, and the brands that will survive in the future. And the Looptail is a philosophy about how we've taken those social tools and the relationships we have with our customers and created a higher purpose around redefining how people look at travel. Mm-hmm. And it can be used on any business. Like any business can think the same way. And I give some examples. Like Nike, in the early days when Nike wanted to sell you clothes, they hired Michael Jordan. They put on these amazing commercials, and when you walked into a store, you felt a certain way because that you remembered the commercial in your mind, and so it triggered you to buy Nike products. But today, to be engaged to the Nike brand, you can follow their employees on Twitter, you can follow their CEO on Twitter or on Facebook, you can follow their factories in China. They have Facebook pages or Twitter pages. The employees that work at those factories have the ability to be on Twitter. There's a transparency and an engagement with brands that's on another level, and it's a social level. And everyone's and now brands have a personality, and it's just not a one-way relationship. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, brands put out commercials that made you feel a certain way, but it was one-way communication. But now consumers can communicate back, and they want that two-way relationship, and it's a much more intimate relationship. In order to mean anything to your customers now, you have to strive for your brand to mean something more than just its product. You have to transcend what you do and create a product that engages your customers to a much higher purpose than what you do. And that's the whole philosophy behind Looptail.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are cleaned every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. So I love it. I mean, and this is why I wanted to have you on the show, because I think this is so fundamental to I don't care whether you're an artist, whether you're, an individual creator. I mean, all of this matters. I want to do a bit more digging into this idea of community culture and karma. I mean, you guys have been doing this since before we had all these social tools. It's kind of a bedrock part of the way you operate. I mean, I remember one of the things that stood out to me is kind of the way you decided to run your tours. Everything is about putting back into the systems in which you're profiting from. Like, I mean, all your tour guides And I love how you have, local CEOs. And I was wondering, can you talk about community and how you guys have embraced that, not just on the web, but in terms of the locations where, share some of the examples, of where you've done this in your life, because I feel like you've done this long before we had the social web.
Yeah, but before, it was very different. We were seen as more of an underground, and we were growing before, the last 7 years when, that we became much bigger because of, with social tools. But we've been doing it for a very long time, and, in many ways it was a labor of love when it first started because it made sense with the authentic experiences we wanted to create for our customers. But our first customers were quite hardcore travelers that thought of us as the best kept secret. They liked knowing about us, but us not necessarily putting it in the forefront of what we did. We were this cool, unique idea, and even though we were growing still by double digit for during that time, our customers had an intimate relationship with us, but it was on a very different level. When we started growing in the last 10 years, where people started taking our trips, for the first time, and we were getting families who last year took a Disney cruise and suddenly were with us in Mongolia because their neighbors did it. That was a whole other market for us. That was a whole other side of the travel business, the mainstream travel business that we were professing for years, for people to get off cruise ships and get out of compound resorts and have local impact and positive impact on people's lives locally when they travel. And then this greater philosophy that travel can be the greatest form of wealth distribution that the world's ever seen if it's done right, and local communities benefit from people traveling. Like, this holistic approach to travel was something that the world had never seen, or certainly a travel company with that kind of message. But in order to accomplish that, we had to create these local benefits or local community relationships. And include local communities in our success as we grew, because we're huge now compared to where we were creating those relationships 10 years ago. We'll run 18,000 tours this year. 18,000 trips will depart this year with passengers for us, and that's in over 100 countries around the world. So in order for us to be successful on that level, at the grassroots level that we are, we have to have a dialogue with local communities, and we have to have a positive impact where we run tours. So we have our foundation, which is Planetara, and the Planetara Foundation, and we build community projects around the world. We have about 40 projects around the world, whether they're street kids' homes or women's weaving projects, children's day schools. We have New Hope in Cambodia. We have eye hospitals, which do corrective surgeries for people that need cataract surgeries. All of these things are projects that are linked and funded by our travelers, but it's to create a local benefit in order for us to preserve the authentic experiences that we promise our customers when they travel with us as well. And changing the way people look at their holiday time and align it more with how we're living our lives more today. Because I said we're all living more sustainable at home. We're recycling, and as I mentioned, before, we're also eating, 100-mile diets, organic, all of these things in which we change. Our holiday time should not be any different. We shouldn't suspend our thoughts because we're going to another country, and we should consider, where we're going and having a positive impact. And just imagine if we got to a place in the world where, your yearly giving back would be going on holidays. Imagine that. That's my idea of, we all kind of save money and, give a certain percentage of our salary. We want to do something as good human beings. We want to do something good. And so you donate money to your local NGO that, makes you feel better, whether it's animal rights or human rights or the environment, whatever it is your cause is. But imagine if you could put all those things together and save all of your money and go on holiday and have that feeling of giving back when you went on holiday. And that's what, the purpose of G Adventures is anyways. And that was the story of the philosophy we built around Looptail. I wanted to extend out to other companies around how that philosophy works.
Well, you know what? Probably my favorite thing that you said in all of that is thinking of travel as the greatest form of wealth distribution ever. That's actually such a touching sentiment because, if you look at it, clearly there's severe income inequality when we look at the world. And what's coming from me from listening to that, I mean, when I look at the internet, I tell people, it's like the internet is like a developing country. And I guess there's two questions that come from everything you've just said. One is around the sort of branding aspect of things. I mean, you guys were known as sort of this cool, hip, underground thing, and then you sort of become mainstream. And I wonder, how do you maintain sort of the authenticity, integrity of what you originally stood for when you sort of become mainstream, without, I think it sounds to me like there's sort of almost a coolness factor with being associated with G Adventures for those early customers. And I wonder how you keep that going. And then, of course, the other thing is that, as people who are internet entrepreneurs, and when I watch what's going on in the web, to some degree it saddens me because I realize there is severe income distribution or severe income inequality. We're not really distributing the wealth equally. And I'm wondering, are the things that we can take from the loop tail and apply to what we're doing in this online world?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's everything. I mean, it's about connectedness and creating community, right? Mm-hmm. And striving for a higher purpose in whatever it is you do. I mean, those are the keys, and those are also the key drivers of our business. We created this business model of happiness, where what drives human happiness outside of consuming. And that is, connectedness, being part of something greater than yourself. Creating all those things as the core principles of your business, and all those things at the core principle of your decision-making from the start is the best way to start companies, because it's about that engagement with your customers and the modern consumer in the modern social world, who has a much more intense and intimate relationship with any brand or company. There's so many companies right now. Since the book has come out, I've been asked to come and speak to, governments and, different, counselors in different regions, because everyone wants to try, or even, and also businesses, because people want to try and retrofit their business to kind of suit the modern kind of way people are consuming today or engaging. But with my book, I wanted people to inspire people to put that at the forefront of the, the incubation stage of when you're starting a business, mm-hmm. and how you engage people online with internet businesses, because you want to create connectedness, originally even with the internet, the relationship was always one way. It was a one-way relationship with customers, where you sell customers product, you offer fantastic service and get it to them quickly and on time. And then you get a loyal repeat customers. But they want more. Customers are now wanting more. There's those customers that are becoming lifestyle brands that are engaging and meaning something and making their lives better outside of just supplying their product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. Let's talk briefly about culture, because, I mean, one of the things that I know from knowing what I do about you is, I mean, you've made some very distinctive choices in how you've built a culture. And I'd love for you to expand on that. I mean, and kind of, what are the implications for us going forward about culture? I mean, what does culture mean to you? And what do we have to think about as we're going forward with what we're doing?
Company culture is, something that comes from the top down. So it starts off with how you're recruiting the people that you bring on, and defining how you're going to, run your business around, your defined core values, and your company culture flows out of that. And again, but it then becomes a part of your brand and becomes a part of your company, because it becomes a part of how people relate to you. Because people, our company has a very distinct and defined company culture, but there's many people that, think we're kind of crazy and kind of, hippies, or, I had someone, I was doing a web thing for travel agents the other day, a webinar, and an agent hung up the phone saying, "Oh, this sounds way too political," and just hung up the phone. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, and there's when you stand for something, or you go out on a limb by putting your company culture and the transparency of your business forward, you have to expect that there's a chance it'll polarize people as well. And so company culture comes from, and by the way, that's also very contrary to how many people grew up believing on how you build a business. People try and build a business by being everything to everyone, by being as generic as possible in how you define yourself. You can cater your company to as many markets as possible, or be available or interesting to as many people as possible. But it just doesn't work like that today. When because any company that tries to be everything for anyone and doesn't stand for anything means very little to the modern consumer. It means nothing really. So it's the companies that really go out on a limb and stand for something, because people relate to your company on an intrinsic level. And that's the people that become loyal, loyal to your brand and truly become ravers. We call them ravers. People who really, 73% of people who take one of our trips becomes a raver, meaning they don't just passively love their trip or love the company. They actively go out and want to talk about it to their friends or write about it or tell people that they should take a trip with us, or they should they want to tell stories about the trip they took with us. So I mean, those building that kind of army of marketing partners, if you will, are really is really how we've become successful. So when I say so quickly, in the last 7 to 8 years, where we've seen phenomenal growth, it's because we've been able to engage those customers in a very different way.
Well, it's funny because we're talking about this in the context of a massive company, but I think that this actually is just as relevant if you're an artist, who's got a gallery you're opening, and you want people to buy your art, or whether you're an author who wants people to read your books. I think the same principles apply.
Oh, most definitely. That's a very, very good point. And there's a point in the book where I also talk about how entrepreneurs are the artists of the business community in many ways. Because when you create a business and when it becomes part of and if you want to drive company culture as part of your brand offering, it becomes a very personal piece of work. Because it ends up becoming very much tied to your personality. It becomes a part of you. And there's no avoiding it either. Like when you get people that that are not as necessarily, I won't say bad people, but people who aren't as necessarily switched on to the outside of the idea of just making money in a business. The business comes across that way to the consumer today because of that transparency. And you can see businesses reeling backwards, trying to change their story and trying to change the way they talk to consumers, whereas just 5 years ago, all they cared about is you spending as much as you could in their stores. Because they're trying to engage those customers. But any size business is relevant to, but it's a creative process. It's a creative process, very much like an artist, which you mentioned. I don't think it's any different. And I get, I've had people, especially artists actually, or musicians. I don't think it's any different, when you're starting a company. It's any different than writing a song or doing a painting or, that working on a sculpture. You're building and you're creating something from your own mind. And you're creating a business, or you're creating something that comes from your heart, and it represents your being, your soul, when you put it out there like that. And Looptail, the book, was an extremely difficult process for me to actually put it out. I pulled the plug a couple times over the course of the year on doing it. I just couldn't bring myself to do it at some point because it was such a personal road to take with getting my story out and going to another level in terms of creating that relationship with our customers or readers or people who are interested in our story. But I also knew the positive impact it had, and that outweighed kind of my own intrepidation. But being an artist and entrepreneur are very similar in so many ways. So for you to mention that, when you go to any kind of business function with Fortune 500 companies, you always see the entrepreneurs in the corner of the room, and they're the awkward ones that are usually in jeans and a hoodie and wearing sneakers, and those are the entrepreneurs in the business community, and they're just very different. They think differently, but as entrepreneurs, we're very creative, but we're also profit driven. We're also creative. We're also interested in market share and being aggressive in the business world, but we just do it and we think very differently.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the book in the process. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk briefly about the actual writing process for the book, and then we'll start wrapping things up. You've said a handful of times throughout this conversation, I'm not a writer, and now you have a best-selling book, which is kind of an oxymoron, in my opinion. But talk to me about that. Finding your voice through this process. Obviously you had an amazing story to tell, but translating it, that doesn't always happen easily for most people, and I'm curious what that's been like for you.
It's been a long process in the decision to want to write the book, and then getting a book agent and going through publishers, and then they're getting their view of what they wanted. wanted the book to be compared to what I wanted it to be. And then physically having to write it. I mean, having to write the book in itself was, as I said, I'm not a writer, so it didn't come naturally for me. And I had an editor that worked with me that really pushed me, and told me where I needed to add things and take things out and clean everything up and add things when to smooth out, to make it a story. And so that's the technical side of the writing. I wasn't motivated to do so much writing either because I'm not naturally a writer. But you know what? In the end, one thing I say in the book is entrepreneurs are some of the best storytellers in the world. And I am a phenomenal storyteller. But that doesn't necessarily make me a good writer. So I just had to find a way to get that story out. And then the personal road to getting it actually out. And writing it, you quite often think, like, who the heck wants to read this stuff? Like, who's the audience for this? Like, who's going to buy this? And the publishers gave me such big advances in the end, because it was a bit of a bidding war when I decided to write it. That I suddenly feel pressured to deliver, because in order for them to make their money, I'm a businessman, right? When I go into partnerships, I want both sides to make money. I want them to be successful too. And so I better write a good book. And then that push and pull with the publishers to get that right balance of what I want and what they want through an editing process. And then actually putting it out and it going on, the New York Times bestseller list was phenomenal. Like, I can't even describe that feeling. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a week ago, I actually went through some of people reviewing it on Amazon and different websites, and just seeing how people are getting positively impacted by the book. It's just been an amazing experience, actually, but one that has taught me a lot. But it was so not natural for me. So it pushed and challenged me in the right ways, and I think I've really grown from it. I don't think I'll ever do that again. I don't think I'll write a book again. And I was so adamant about it being in my own voice that as well. And so originally I tried to hire a ghostwriter, and that didn't work out. And then having to plow through it and really come up with and also be honest, and because the publishers wanted a business book. I was a cross between more like a inspiration kind of memoir kind of book, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then people wanted it to be more like a self-help kind of book, and then the Dalai Lama got involved. The Dalai Lama wanted to write the foreword, and that put it on another level in terms of level of interest for people with the book. So all of those things came together, and over a course of a very long time, it was over 2 years, and it was the perfect storm. And then when it came out, it was an immediate success, which has been very rewarding. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is great. I mean, it's funny. A lot of our authors will often compare writing a book to giving childbirth. It's quite a painful experience, and I love that you use the analogy of the perfect storm, because I think a lot of things have to happen for a book to come together. And I really appreciate that you mentioned this idea of wanting to do it in your own voice, because I think you definitely achieved that. I think you've done something very interesting with this book. I mean, for those of you guys listening, if you haven't picked it up, somehow you managed to blend all those genres of memoir, business book, and self-help all together in a very compelling way that, to me, like I said, I think it was Gary Arndt who said, "Hey, Srini, there's this book you might want to talk to Bruce on your show," and it definitely stood out to me. And I can tell you, I get a lot of books, and I don't always say yes, especially when they're just standard business books. But this definitely, it piqued my interest.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because a lot of people have said that because it was the confluence of a lot of influences. Because I had two publishers which were very aggressive, which was, I'm from Canada, so my story is obviously most well known here. So the Canadian publishers had a completely different idea because everyone in Canada knows me. I'm a kind of a bit of a famous success story here. So they want more memoir, right? Mm-hmm. They want more story. They want more personal stuff about me, the person. The U.S. publishers didn't care about me, the person. They want business. They want dollars and cents. They want learnings and lessons for entrepreneurs and business people. They want a business book. And then me, on the inside, I want to inspire people. I want to help people become, stronger and better versions of themselves by, compounding their growth and their experiences. And I wanted to have that positive impact. And everyone kind of got their wish with this book in the end. And I didn't realize it was so unique until it kind of came out and people started saying things like you just said, which thank you very much. It's been overwhelming actually with the response on just the book, outside of it, the impact on my business, or it just people's immediate impact on how they read the book, and how I'm saying exactly what you said actually, that it stood out amongst other business books or other books that were on their desk. I've heard that from professors, people who bought 50 copies to give to all their employees or whatever, that it just was, it touched them in a way that they, and many couldn't explain, but or in a way that they wanted to share it. And I couldn't ask for a better, I couldn't ask for more than that. I mean, when I put this book out, the day this book came out, it was a horrible 2 weeks leading up to the release date in September. I was just thinking, like, who the heck is going to buy this book? Like, it just sounds like me dribbling on and whining the whole time about this and that. I said, people are going to think I'm the biggest whiner, but it really, I wanted it to be about overcoming adversity and, overcoming obstacles and, keeping your eye on the prize and, building winning teams and all those things that make companies great and make people great. I wanted that book to have that influence, but in the process, I have to talk about our ups and downs, as you've mentioned. It was my biggest fear that people think, oh, this is just, he just comes across as such a whiner. Look at how much success he has, but he goes back to talk about this and that, and just being, complaining about everything. But luckily, that didn't happen.
Well, it's funny. I think that what you're feeling is what every artist feels when they put their work out into the world.
Sure, yeah.
That's I mean, I had a woman here who's been writing for 20 years, and she says, I feel that, every morning you have to give yourself permission.
Yes, I mean that there's something said about that. That's almost that. There's a bit about that in the karma side in terms of meditation, the meditation side. If I'm big into yoga and meditation, but that comes onto the self-help side. But you're totally right. Every day, I mean, every day is your ability to make every day count. And what are you going to do today for tomorrow? All of those things and those questions are about your permission. I mean, taking advantage of every opportunity and, remembering where you came from and building on all of that to make yourself a better version of yourself every day. I mean, I always say that, and your company shouldn't be treated any differently.
So, Bruce, I'm going to wrap our chat with one final question for you. You've built something from the ground up and clearly been very successful at it. I mean, you talk about many peers. I mean, even some of the people who, wrote the back of the book. I mean, wrote the testimonials in the back of the book are people like Alexis Ohanian from Reddit. And I mean, in the years that you've, seen other entrepreneurs and people who start big projects and build things from the ground up, I keep seeing this pattern, and I've asked this question to hundreds of people, and maybe I jokingly call it for the research for the book that I don't know I'm going to write, but what do you think it is that distinguishes the people who actually achieve what they're setting out to do from the ones who don't?
I don't know if I understand the question fully. Can I just ask?
Oh, yeah. Let me be a bit more clear. So, I mean, I think there's two groups of people: those who set out with the best of intentions, hoping to accomplish something big, and then there's a group, and they don't get there. And then there's a group who basically does it, and they get there. They get to where they want to go. And I'm curious what you think is the difference between those two groups.
I think there's, life experience and awareness. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that have. That want to get somewhere, but want to get there too fast, or they don't have patience in which they want to achieve something, and that comes with a lack of awareness of what you're capable of at the time, or what you're capable of presently, as opposed to what you'll be capable of 5 years from now or 2 years from now, depending on how you look. So people who put their heart and soul into everything that they do, and are really committed and conscientious, no matter what it is you do, whether it's just shopping for groceries or whether it's doing a report in school or whether it's the job that you do. I think that we're in a generation of entitlement. I think there's a huge amount of entitlement with the generation that's coming, the younger generation today. And I'm sounding like my father now. You kids today, but there's a certain set that people have expectations that they expect that they should be successful because they just work hard or because they have great ideas. And I always tell people like that, you know what? great ideas are a dime a dozen. There's tons of unemployed people that have great ideas. The skill is in the execution, on how you execute your ideas and how you execute your life. And in order to do that, you have to be extremely open and gracious and be able to accept everything that comes your way with an open heart and continually challenge yourself at the right time to be able to grow and to take things on when it's the right time for you in order to get you to that next level. Every step you take will get you to the eventual finish line. It's people that want to be at the finish line before they put in the work or before they put in, the hours or the hard work that really never really come to fruition because they want to get there before they don't see the path. And that takes a certain level of awareness. And because I employ almost 2,000 people now, I see that in young people all the time where, not even young people, I should say older people too, the people that are able to adapt and change and are able to grow with a business over a long period of time and are continually allowing their hard work and their effort speak for itself and not constantly questioning, where they're supposed to be because they know where they have to be. There's a big difference between those people and people who arrive, and I see it all the time, who, we're a very cool company and we're a fast-moving company, and after a year of being here, they want to know, so what have you done for me lately? And what is their next step? As opposed to just, putting your nose to the grind and letting your results and letting your hard work determine, and just keep an open heart and wait for your opportunity. Be very patient and be very pure with your intentions of what you want to do and creating that purpose in your life. I really believe that those are the people that always rise to the top, and I see it over and over again. Well, here and outside as well. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and I think it's a perfect and poetic way to wrap up our conversation. Bruce, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share some of your insights with our listeners here at the Unmistakable Creative. This has been really cool, and for those of you guys who haven't read this book, it's one of the best books I've read this year for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to quote you on that.
And for those of you guys listening, we'll wrap the show with that.
Thanks for listening in on another candid conversation at the Unmistakable Creative. Embrace your inner misfit. Express your creative voice. And remember, the goal isn't to live forever, but to create something that will.